the blind girl, and the broken cowboy. Ethan Cole had ridden past plenty of things in his life. Burned homesteads, unmarked graves, dreams turned to dust. But he'd never ridden past a child. The little girl sat small and still beside the rutted Texas trail, tears cutting clean lines through the dirt on her cheeks, her eyes staring at nothing. The wagon train that left her was already a day gone. She was blind, they'd said. A burden. Couldn't earn her keep. Ethan's horse shifted beneath him, eager to move on. He should let it. He had nothing left to give anyone, not even himself. But her fingers were moving, tracing patterns in the dust like she was writing letters to someone who'd never come back. And Ethan Cole, despite everything he'd lost, despite every reason to keep riding, found he couldn't move. Before we begin this journey together, I want to invite you to walk every step of this story with me. If it moves you, please hit that like button and comment with your city below. I love seeing how far these frontier tales travel across the world. Now let's step back to that dusty Texas road and meet a cowboy who thought he had nothing left to lose, until he found someone with even less. The sun hammered down on the Texas plains like divine punishment, turning the air thick enough to chew. Ethan Cole pulled his hat lower, more habit than help, and studied the small figure that had stopped him in his tracks. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old. Her dress, once probably yellow, had faded to the color of old newspaper and hung loose on a frame that hadn't seen regular meals in some time. Her brown hair tangled around her face, and her feet, bare and dusty, were tucked under her like she was trying to make herself smaller than she already was. But it was her eyes that held him. They were open, staring straight ahead with a strange, unfocused intensity that made Ethan's chest tighten. She wasn't looking at anything. She couldn't. "Hey there," he said, his voice rough from days without using it. "You lost?" The girl's head turned toward his voice with the precision of a bird tracking sound. "No, sir. I know right where I am." Despite himself, Ethan almost smiled. There was steel in that small voice. "Where's that?" "About 3 miles past where the Ferguson wagon train stopped for water yesterday. They said the town's another day's ride east." She paused, her fingers still moving in those strange patterns in the dust. "They said I couldn't come." Ethan dismounted, his knees protesting. At 34, he felt twice that age. The past 6 months had carved years into his bones, losing the ranch to drought, watching Sarah's grave marker disappear behind him, riding with no destination and less purpose. He crouched a respectful distance from the girl, studying her in the harsh light. Up close, he could see the remnants of tears on her cheeks, but her jaw was set firm. Whatever crying she'd done was finished. "What's your name?" "Lily Harper." She tilted her head slightly, and Ethan realized she was listening to him with an intensity he'd rarely encountered. "What's yours?" "Ethan Cole." He pulled his canteen from his belt, unstopped it. "You thirsty, Lily Harper?" Her fingers stilled in the dust. "Yes, sir." He pressed the canteen into her hands, watching as she found the opening with automatic precision and drank carefully, not gulping despite what must have been considerable thirst. When she finished, she held it out in exactly the direction he was sitting. "Thank you, Mr. Cole." Just Ethan. He took the canteen, his mind working through a problem he hadn't asked for and didn't want. "Where's your folks?" Something shifted in Lily's expression, a tightening around her mouth, a slight downward pull. "Mama died of fever 2 weeks ago. Papa 3 days before that. We were going to Oregon. Mrs. Ferguson said she'd see I got to the next town, but..." She trailed off, her fingers resuming their patterns. "But," Ethan prompted, though he could already guess, "but I slow them down. I can't see the ruts in the road, can't watch for Indians, can't do laundry without help. Mr. Ferguson said they had 8 children of their own and couldn't take on another mouth, especially one that couldn't earn her keep." Lily's voice remained steady, reciting facts. "Mrs. Ferguson left me a canteen and half a loaf of bread. She said someone would come along. Someone always does on this road." Ethan looked east, where the wagon train had disappeared, then west, where he'd been headed with no plan beyond away. Then at this small girl, who'd been left like broken furniture beside the trail. "What were you doing, just now, with your fingers?" Lily's face brightened slightly. "Writing. Mama taught me letters before she got sick. I practice in the dust so I don't forget the shapes." Can't see 'em to know if you got them right. No, sir. But I can feel if my finger's moving the way Mama showed me. She said learning was the one thing nobody could take from me, even if I couldn't see the page. The brightness dimmed. I suppose that wasn't quite true. Ethan stood, his decision forming before his mind fully caught up with it. He was a fool. He had no money, no home, no prospects. He was riding toward nothing with less than nothing in his saddlebags. The last thing he needed was responsibility for a blind child. But Sarah's voice echoed in his memory. The measure of a man isn't in what he has, Ethan. It's in what he does when he has nothing left. Can you ride a horse, Lily? Her head snapped up, those unseeing eyes finding his direction with unnerving accuracy. I've never tried, sir. It's Ethan, and there's a first time for everything. He walked to his horse, a patient mare named Dancer who'd seen him through the worst months of his life. I'm going to lift you up now, if that's all right. Where are we going? Lily's voice held the first tremor of hope, fragile as spring ice. Don't rightly know yet, but you can't stay here. He reached down, and after a moment's hesitation, Lily raised her arms. She weighed almost nothing. Ethan settled her in front of his saddle, showed her where to hold. Her hands found the saddle horn and gripped it with the determination of someone who understood second chances didn't come often. You afraid of horses? He asked, swinging up behind her. I don't know. I've never really met one. This time Ethan did smile, the expression feeling foreign on his face. Well, this is Dancer. She's patient and steady, and she's carried me through some rough country. I reckon she can handle one more passenger. As if in agreement, Dancer shifted beneath them, accepting the additional weight without complaint. Which way, Ethan? Lily asked. It was a simple question with complicated answers. East lay settlements, civilization, orphanages where a blind girl might find proper care. West lay wilderness, danger, isolation. North or south were just variations on the same uncertainty. But about 20 miles northeast, if his memory served, there was a small town called Cedar Flats where he'd once sold horses. And 5 miles beyond that, tucked in a valley with a creek running through it, sat the line shack where he'd spent a winter years ago when the world still made sense. Northeast, he said, turning Dancer's head. There's a place I know. Might still be standing. Is it home? Lily asked. Ethan considered the question as Dancer began walking, her hooves raising small clouds of dust that hung in the still air. Home was the ranch Sarah had filled with laughter. Home was the future they'd planned, the children they'd hoped for, the life the drought and fever had stolen. No, he said finally, but it's shelter. That'll do for now. They rode in silence for a while, the sun beginning its descent toward the western horizon. Lily sat perfectly still, her small body swaying with Dancer's rhythm like she'd been born in the saddle. Every so often, her head would turn toward some sound Ethan barely registered, a bird call, the rustle of prairie grass, the distant yip of a coyote. You hear all that? He asked. Mama said my ears work extra hard because my eyes don't work at all. Lily paused. Sometimes I hear things other people miss, like how your breathing changes when you're thinking hard, or how Dancer's hooves sound different when she steps on different ground. That right? Yes, sir. Ethan, I mean. She shifted slightly, adjusting her grip. The ground got rockier about 50 paces back, and there's water somewhere ahead. I can hear it moving. Ethan looked up sharply. She was right on both counts. The trail had started climbing through an area of scattered stone, and if he listened carefully, he could just make out the distant sound of Willow Creek, still a quarter mile off. You've got sharp ears, Lily Harper. Thank you. She fell quiet again. Then, Ethan? Why did you stop? It was the question he'd been asking himself since the moment he dismounted. The honest answer was complex, guilt, loneliness, the ghost of his wife's expectations, the simple fact that he couldn't ride past a crying child. But complexity had no place in this heat, on this trail, with this small weight of responsibility settling across his shoulders. Because someone needed to, he said simply. The Fergusons didn't think so. The Fergusons were thinking about their 8 children and a long road ahead. Can't fault people for that. Ethan surprised himself by meaning it. But I'm just one man with no place particular to be. Seemed like our paths might run together for a spell. How long is a spell? Don't know yet. Lily seemed to accept this. Her fingers, Ethan noticed, had started moving again, tracing those invisible letters against the saddle horn with the same focused intensity she'd shown in the dust. What are you writing? he asked. My name, and Mama's name, and Papa's. Her voice remained steady, but Ethan felt the small tremor that ran through her. So I don't forget how they feel. Something cracked in Ethan's chest, a fissure in the careful walls he'd built around his grief. He knew about not forgetting. He knew about tracing beloved shapes in the dark, desperate to hold on to what time kept trying to steal. That's good thinking, he managed. My Sarah, she used to keep a journal, wrote every day, even when there wasn't much to write about. She said memories were like water. If you didn't catch them in something, they'd just run away. Is Sarah your wife? Was. The word tasted like dust. Fever took her last winter. Lily's fingers stilled. I'm sorry. They were simple words, the same ones dozens of people had offered him over the past months. But from this small girl who'd lost everything, they carried a weight of understanding that made them feel true. I'm sorry about your folks, too, Ethan said quietly. Thank you. Lily tilted her head back slightly, her face turning up toward where the sun was painting the sky in shades of orange and gold she couldn't see. Ethan? What does it look like? The sunset, I mean. Mama used to try to describe it, but I never quite understood. Ethan looked at the horizon, trying to find words for something he'd stopped really seeing years ago. Well, the sun's dropping low, turning the whole sky orange and pink and purple all mixed together, like someone spilled paint across the heavens. The clouds are catching fire at the edges, all gold and red, and the land sort of glows. Everything gets softer, warmer. It sounds beautiful. I suppose it is. Ethan realized he was seeing it now, truly seeing it for the first time in months. The Comanches say each sunset is different, that no two are exactly the same. Like people, Lily said thoughtfully. Like people, Ethan agreed. By the time they reached Willow Creek, full dark had fallen. Ethan dismounted first, then lifted Lily down, steadying her as her feet found the ground. She stood still for a moment, orienting herself to the new sounds and smells. Water's about 10 paces straight ahead, Ethan said. Ground slopes down gentle, but there's loose rocks. You want help walking it? Lily considered this. Can I try myself first? You can walk beside me in case I stumble. Fair enough. He watched as she took careful steps forward, her hands slightly out for balance, her feet feeling the ground before committing her weight. She moved slowly but with growing confidence, adjusting her path twice when she encountered obstacles Ethan would have sworn she couldn't possibly sense. At the water's edge, she knelt carefully, found the creek with her fingers, and cupped water to her mouth. Dancer, following on her lead, drank beside her. It's cold, Lily said with something like wonder. Really cold. Comes down from the mountains. Ethan settled himself on a flat rock nearby, pulling jerky from his saddlebag. Snowmelt, even this late in the year. He divided the jerky, pressing half into Lily's hand. She felt the size and shape before biting into it carefully. They ate in comfortable silence, the creek singing its endless song, the stars beginning to emerge overhead. We'll make camp here tonight, Ethan said finally. Get to the cabin tomorrow. What's the cabin like? Small, one room, fireplace that smokes if the wind's wrong, but it's got a roof and walls, and that's more than we've got right now. He paused. It's pretty rough, Lily. No proper furniture to speak of, just a place cowboys use when they're working far from the main ranch. Is there a bed? A cot. I can make you a pallet on the floor. That's more than I had this morning. Lily's voice held quiet pragmatism that seemed decades older than her years. I'll manage. Ethan spread his bedroll near the fire he'd built, then fashioned a makeshift pallet from his spare blanket and saddle blanket for Lily. She settled onto it without complaint, curling on her side with her hands tucked under her cheek. Ethan, she said into the darkness, what happens after tomorrow? It was the question he'd been avoiding. The truth was, he had no idea. He had maybe $12 to his name, a horse, a saddle, and now a blind 8-year-old who depended on him for everything. The cabin would give them shelter, but then what? How did a broke cowboy with no prospects raise a child, especially one who needed things he didn't know how to provide? But looking at her small form in the firelight, remembering her fingers tracing letters in the dust with determined hope, Ethan found he couldn't voice any of those doubts. We figure it out as we go, he said, one day at a time. Mama used to say that. one day at a time, one foot in front of the other, one breath after another. Lily's voice grew softer, sleep pulling at her. She said, "That's how you survive the hard things." "Your mama was a wise woman." "Yes, sir, she was." Lily yawned. "Ethan, thank you for stopping." "You're welcome, Lily." Within minutes, her breathing had evened into sleep. Ethan sat watching the fire, his mind churning through impossible calculations. He'd need to find work in Cedar Flats. Maybe the livery needed help, or one of the ranches was hiring hands for spring roundup. But who would watch Lily while he worked? And what about winter? The cabin barely kept out the cold. Dancer nickered softly, as if sensing his turmoil. Ethan reached up to stroke her neck. "I know, girl. I don't know what I'm doing either." But as he settled into his own bedroll, listening to Lily's peaceful breathing and the creek's endless song, Ethan felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Not quite hope. Hope felt too ambitious, too fragile. But something in that direction. Purpose, maybe. Or just the simple knowledge that tomorrow he'd wake with a reason to, which was more than he'd had yesterday. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the struggles of one broken cowboy and one abandoned girl. But under that vast Texas sky, something small had shifted. A choice had been made. A path had been chosen. And whatever came next, they'd face it together. What? The next morning arrived with the kind of brutal clarity that only high desert can produce. Ethan woke to find Lily already awake, sitting quietly on her pallet, with her face turned toward the sunrise she couldn't see. "Morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Good morning, Ethan. The birds woke me. There's so many of them here." He listened, realizing she was right. The cottonwoods along the creek were alive with birdsong. Meadowlarks, sparrows, the harsh cry of a jay. Sounds he'd stopped hearing years ago, background noise to a life that had demanded all his attention elsewhere. "You hungry?" he asked. "Yes, sir." They shared the last of his jerky and some hardtack that required soaking in creek water to be edible. It wasn't much, but it would get them to Cedar Flats, where Ethan could buy supplies. At least, he hoped he could. $12 didn't stretch far. After breaking camp, they rode northeast under a sky that promised heat before noon. Lily sat in front of Ethan again, her small hands gripping the saddle horn, her head turning to track sounds that built her map of the world. "Tell me what you see," she said after they'd been riding for an hour. Ethan looked around, trying to translate sight into words. Flatland mostly, with some rolls and dips, grass about knee-high, gone gold from the sun, scattered mesquite trees looking tough and stubborn, skies blue as a robin's egg, not a cloud anywhere. "Are there flowers?" He looked more carefully. Some. Little yellow ones in patches, and purple ones, thistles, I think. Not much blooms this time of year. Mama said prairie flowers were brave, that they grew anyway, even when it was hard. "Sounds like someone else I know," Ethan said. He felt rather than saw Lily's smile. By midday, they'd reached the outskirts of Cedar Flats. The town hadn't changed much in the 5 years since Ethan had last passed through. One main street lined with false front buildings, a church at the north end, a saloon at the south, and everything necessary for survival in between. The blacksmith's hammer rang out its familiar rhythm. The general store's windows displayed goods that probably cost twice what they had back east. And the livery stable sat squat and practical at the edge of town, its corrals holding a handful of horses. Ethan guided Dancer to the general store and dismounted, lifting Lily down beside him. "Stay close," he said. "I need to buy some supplies." Inside, the store smelled of leather, coffee, and the peculiar mustiness of dry goods that had traveled far to reach this frontier outpost. The proprietor, a thin man with spectacles and suspicious eyes, looked up from his ledger. "Help you?" "Need some flour, beans, coffee, and salt if you've got it," Ethan said. "And maybe some eggs if they're not too dear." The proprietor's eyes shifted to Lily, who stood close to Ethan's side, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "The child yours?" "She is now." Ethan met the man's gaze steadily. Something passed across the proprietor's face, curiosity, judgment, maybe a flicker of pity. But he gathered the requested items without further comment, tallying them up with practiced efficiency. $4.60. Ethan counted out the money carefully, watching his small reserve dwindle. $8 left. He took the burlap sack of supplies, feeling its weight. "Obliged," he said, turning to leave. "Mister?" The proprietor's voice stopped him. "If you're looking for work, Tom Hardisty's ranch might be hiring. He lost some hands over the winter. It's about 15 miles north." Ethan nodded his thanks. 15 miles meant a day's ride there and back, too far for the cabin, but he filed the information away. If things got desperate enough, he'd figure something out. Outside, he secured the supplies to Dancer's saddle, then helped Lily mount up again. The final 5 miles to the cabin passed quickly. The familiar landmarks emerging from memory, the lightning-struck cottonwood, the dry wash that only ran in spring, the rocky outcrop that marked the turnoff. The cabin sat exactly where he remembered it, weathered but still standing in its small valley. One room, maybe 12 feet square, with a stone fireplace taking up most of one wall. The roof sagged slightly in the middle, and one window had lost its glass sometime in the intervening years, but the door still hung on its leather hinges. Ethan dismounted and lifted Lily down, watching as she oriented herself to this new place. Her head turned slowly, taking in information he could only guess at. The creak of the door, the rustle of leaves from the single cottonwood shading the cabin's west side, the distant trickle of the creek that fed into the valley. "It's quiet," she said finally. "Peaceful." "That it is." Ethan pushed open the door, wincing at the shower of dust and debris that fell from the frame. "Let me check it over first, make sure there's nothing dangerous inside." The cabin's interior was about what he'd expected. Thick dust, cobwebs in every corner, a family of mice that scattered at his entrance. The cot still stood against the far wall, its rope frame sagging but intact. The fireplace held the remnants of someone's last fire, probably years old. A rough table and single chair completed the furnishings, but it was dry. The roof, despite its sag, appeared sound, and the fireplace drew properly when he tested it. They could make this work. "All right," he called to Lily. "Come on in, but step careful. The floor's got some loose boards." He guided her inside, describing the layout as they went. "Fireplace straight ahead, about 8 paces. Cot to your left along the wall. Table and chair to your right. And we're about 3 steps from the door." Lily stood in the center of the room, her hands slightly out, memorizing distances. Then she walked carefully to the cot, felt its frame, tested its strength. "This will be fine," she said, with that same pragmatic acceptance that both broke and fortified Ethan's heart. They spent the afternoon making the cabin livable. Ethan swept and scrubbed while Lily, after he'd oriented her carefully, organized their meager supplies on the table. She worked slowly but methodically, her fingers reading the shapes of cans and sacks, creating order from chaos. By evening, the cabin almost felt like a home. Ethan had built up the fire, boiled coffee, and cooked beans with some of the precious salt pork he'd bought. They ate sitting on the floor near the fireplace, the warmth pushing back the evening chill. "Ethan?" Lily said, setting down her empty plate. "What happens tomorrow?" There it was again, that question he couldn't answer. Tomorrow he needed to find work. Tomorrow he needed to figure out how to care for a blind child with no money and no help. Tomorrow, the real challenge began. But tonight, with the fire crackling and the cabin holding back the dark, Ethan decided tomorrow could wait. "Tomorrow we keep going," he said. "One day at a time, remember?" Lily smiled, and in the firelight, for just a moment, she looked less like a burden someone had abandoned and more like the child she should have been all along, safe, warm, and wanted. Outside, the Texas night settled over the valley like a blanket, and inside the cabin, 2 lost souls found, if not quite home, then at least a place to rest while they figured out where home might be. The first week passed in a blur of survival and adjustment. Ethan rose each morning before dawn, built up the fire, and made coffee strong enough to strip paint. Lily woke to the sounds of his movements, learning the rhythms of their new life together, the scrape of the kettle against iron, the creak of floorboards under his boots, the particular way he cleared his throat before speaking. On the 3rd morning, Ethan stood at the cabin door, his hat in his hands, struggling with words he didn't want to say. "I need to ride into town today. Look for work." He watched Lily's face, saw the flicker of fear she tried to hide. "You'll be all right here for a few hours?" Lily sat at the table, her fingers resting on the rough wood. "How long?" "Should be back before dark. I'll leave you water, food within reach. And I'll bank the fire so it stays warm but won't get dangerous. I can manage. Her voice was steady, but her hands had formed small fists in her lap. Ethan crossed to where she sat, crouching beside her chair. I wouldn't go if there was another way. But we need money for winter supplies, and that means I need work. I know. Lily turned her face toward him. I'm not afraid to be alone, Ethan. I'm afraid you won't come back. The words hit him like a physical blow. How many people had this child watched leave and never return? Her parents to death, the Fergusons to callous practicality. Why should she believe he was different? I'll come back, he said firmly. I give you my word, Lily Harper. I'll always come back. She studied his face with that peculiar intensity of hers, as if she could see past his eyes to the truth beneath. Finally, she nodded. All right. Ethan spent an hour teaching her the cabin's geography in his absence. How many steps to the water bucket, where he'd left bread and dried apples, how to test the fire's heat with her hand held at a safe distance. Lily absorbed it all with focused concentration, walking the space until her movements gained confidence. When he finally mounted Dancer, leaving Lily standing in the cabin doorway with her hand on the frame, Ethan felt like he was abandoning her all over again. But desperation was a powerful motivator, and their supplies wouldn't last another week. Cedar Flats looked different in full daylight, busier and somehow more judgmental. Ethan tried the livery first, where the stable master needed someone to muck stalls and exercise horses. The pay was poor, 50 cents a day, but it was something. He took it, working through the morning until his back ached and his hands were raw. The stable master, a gruff man named Hoskins, paid him for the half-day's work and told him to come back tomorrow. At the general store, Ethan bought beans, cornmeal, and a small sack of sugar with his 25 cents, then stood outside trying to calculate how many days of stable work it would take to see them through winter. The math didn't work, no matter how he figured it. You're the one with that blind girl. Ethan turned to find a woman watching him from the store's entrance. She was perhaps 40, with graying hair pulled back severely and eyes that assessed him with the cool efficiency of someone who'd learned to measure people quickly. I am, he said. Ruth Patterson. I run the boarding house. She gestured down the street to a 2-story structure with a painted sign. Saw you ride in with her last week. Saw you leave her alone this morning, too. Ethan's jaw tightened. She's safe. I made sure of it. I'm not judging Mr. Cole. Ethan Cole. Mr. Cole. I'm observing. Ruth Patterson folded her arms. A blind child alone in a cabin while her guardian works in town. That's a situation that concerns people. People can mind their own business. The words came out harsher than Ethan intended, born of guilt and fear that she was right. Ruth's expression didn't change. Can they? In a small town where everyone depends on everyone else? Where a child's welfare is community business? She paused. I'm not your enemy, Mr. Cole, but others might be, if they think that girl's being neglected. She's not neglected. She's fed, sheltered, and safe. For now. But winter's coming, and stable work won't feed 2 people properly, let alone keep them warm. Ruth studied him with those assessing eyes. You got family? Anyone who could help? No, ma'am. The girl? None that I know of. Ethan shifted his weight, wanting to end this conversation and get back to Lily. We're managing fine. You're managing poorly, Mr. Cole, but with good intentions. There's a difference. Ruth moved closer, lowering her voice. I employ 2 women at the boarding house, cooking, cleaning, laundry. If that child could learn to help with simple tasks, I could use another pair of hands. Nothing dangerous. Folding linens, peeling vegetables. Things she could do by touch. Ethan stared at her. You'd hire a blind 8-year-old? I'd give her a chance to earn her keep and learn useful skills. Whether she's capable of it, that's for you and her to decide. Ruth straightened. Think about it. Come by tomorrow if you're interested. But Mr. Cole, whatever you decide, that girl needs more than a cabin and minimal food. She needs a future. And out here, futures don't come free. She walked away before Ethan could respond, leaving him standing on the dusty street with a quarter's worth of supplies and a head full of uncomfortable truths. He rode back to the cabin faster than was probably wise, driven by an irrational fear that Lily would be gone when he arrived. But she was there, sitting at the table, her fingers tracing letters in a light coating of flour she'd spread on the wood. Ethan? She called at the sound of Dancer's hooves. It's me! He dismounted quickly, ducking through the door. You all right? I'm fine. I practiced my letters, and I counted to 100, and I found a spider in the corner and convinced it to move outside instead of staying where it might get stepped on. She turned her face toward him, smiling. Did you find work? I did. At the livery stable. It's not much, but it's steady. That's good. Lily's smile dimmed slightly. Will you have to leave every day? Ethan sat heavily in the chair, suddenly exhausted. That's the hard part. I don't see a way around it. They were quiet for a moment, the weight of their situation settling between them. Finally, Lily spoke, her voice careful. Ethan, I don't want to be a burden. You're not. I am, she interrupted gently. I know I am. I can't work. I can't contribute. I can only take what you give me. Her fingers had stilled on the table. The Fergusons thought I was a burden. Maybe they were right. No. Ethan's voice came out sharp, surprising them both. He softened his tone. No, Lily, they were wrong. You're not a burden. You're a person who deserves care and dignity, same as anyone else. The fact that you can't see doesn't change that. But if I could do something, if I could help somehow, there might be a way. Ethan found himself explaining Ruth Patterson's offer, watching Lily's expression shift from surprise to cautious hope. She wants to hire me? To work in her boarding house? If you think you could manage it. Simple things, she said, folding linens, peeling vegetables, tasks you could do by touch. Ethan paused. But it would mean going into town with me each day, being around strangers, learning new spaces. Lily sat very still, processing this. When she spoke, her voice was small but determined. I'd like to try. You sure? It won't be easy. Being easy isn't the same as being worth doing. She lifted her chin. Mama always said I was capable of more than people thought. Maybe this is my chance to prove it. Looking at her, small and scared but resolute, Ethan felt that crack in his chest widen a little more. This child had lost everything and been abandoned for being inconvenient, yet here she sat, volunteering to work so she wouldn't be a burden. All right, he said quietly. We'll go talk to Mrs. Patterson tomorrow. That night, Lily was too excited to sleep. She lay on her pallet by the fire, asking question after question about the boarding house, about the town, about what people would expect of her. Ethan answered as best he could, tempering her enthusiasm with gentle warnings about how hard the work might be, how unkind some people could be to someone different. I know people can be unkind, Lily said into the darkness. I've heard the whispers. What a shame. That poor blind thing. What use is she? But Ethan? I'm tired of being poor and blind and useless. I want to be Lily Harper who works at the boarding house. Is that foolish? No, Ethan said, his throat tight. That's not foolish at all. The next morning, they rode into Cedar Flats together. Lily sat straight in the saddle, her nervousness showing only in the white-knuckled grip on the saddle horn. Ruth Patterson's boarding house stood at the quiet end of Main Street, a well-maintained structure with a wide porch and curtained windows. Ruth answered their knock promptly, her assessing gaze taking in both of them before she stepped back. Come in, Mr. Cole. And you must be Lily. Yes, ma'am. Lily's voice was barely above a whisper. The boarding house interior smelled of lye soap, baking bread, and the particular stuffiness of too many people living in close quarters. Ruth led them to a large kitchen where two women worked at a massive stove and prep table. They looked up with open curiosity. This is Mary and Agnes, Ruth said. Ladies, this is Lily Harper. She's going to try working with us if we can find tasks that suit her abilities. Mary, younger and round-faced, smiled warmly. Agnes, older and stern, frowned. She's blind, Ruth. What she can possibly do is more than you're assuming, Ruth interrupted firmly. Everyone starts somewhere, Agnes. Lily will start with simple tasks, and we'll see how she manages. She turned to Lily. Now then, let's see what those fingers of yours can do. What followed was an hour of gentle testing that left Ethan simultaneously proud and heartbroken. Ruth gave Lily a pile of folded napkins that had been intentionally mixed up, asking her to sort them by size and texture. Lily's fingers worked quickly, confidently identifying differences Ethan wouldn't have noticed. She folded them back with precise, even edges. Next came vegetables, potatoes that needed peeling. Ruth guided Lily's hands to show her how to hold the knife safely, how to feel for the right angle. Lily worked slowly but carefully, producing peels that were perhaps thicker than necessary but acceptable. "She's got good hands," Mary said quietly to Ruth. "Patient, too. That counts for something." But it was when Ruth led Lily to a massive pile of laundry that something shifted. Bed sheets, pillowcases, towels, all needed folding. Ruth showed Lily the technique once, guiding her hands through the motions. Then Lily began working on her own, her movements becoming steadier with each piece. "I can do this," she said, and there was wonder in her voice. "I can actually do this." "You can," Ruth agreed. "The question is, can you do it every day, for hours at a time, when your back aches and your fingers are sore and you'd rather be anywhere else?" Lily straightened, her unseeing eyes somehow finding Ruth's direction with uncanny accuracy. "Yes, ma'am. I can. I will." Ruth looked at Ethan, then back at Lily. 20 cents a day, same as I pay Mary and Agnes for their work. 6 days a week, Sundays off. You'll start at 7 in the morning and work until 4 in the afternoon. Lunch provided. If you can't keep up or if the work proves too difficult, we part ways with no hard feelings. Agreed? Agreed, Lily said immediately, then hesitated. "Mrs. Patterson? Thank you for giving me a chance." Something in Ruth's stern expression softened. "Everyone deserves a chance, child. What you do with it is up to you." When they left the boarding house, Lily was practically vibrating with excitement. Ethan lifted her onto Dancer, then swung up behind her. "You did well in there," he said. "I have a job, Ethan, an actual job where I earn money." Lily's voice held a joy he'd never heard from her. "I'm not useless. I'm not a burden. I'm Lily Harper, who works at the boarding house." That night, over a dinner of beans and cornbread that tasted better than it had any right to, they planned their new routine. They'd rise before dawn, ride to town together, and split up. Ethan to the livery, Lily to the boarding house. They'd meet at 4 to ride home together. Between his 50 cents and her 20 cents, they'd have 70 cents a day. $4.20 a week. Enough to survive, maybe even save a little. "It's going to be hard work," Ethan warned. "Good," Lily said firmly. "I'm ready for hard work." The first week proved her both right and wrong. She was ready for hard work in spirit, but her body struggled to adapt. She came home each evening exhausted, her fingers raw from repeated tasks, her back aching from hours of standing, but she never complained. Instead, she'd sit by the fire while Ethan made dinner, telling him about her day with an enthusiasm that made his own stable work seem less tedious by comparison. "Mary showed me how to tell if an egg is bad by shaking it," she'd say. Or, "Agnes let me help with the biscuits today. I can feel when the dough is the right consistency." Or, "A guest from Kansas City said my corner folds were the neatest he'd ever seen." By the second week, something else began happening. Lily started bringing home skills she'd learned: how to organize by touch, how to orient herself in new spaces quickly, how to remember complex patterns. She rearranged the cabin's interior with Ethan's permission, placing items where they were more logically grouped. She took over some of the cooking, her fingers learning to judge doneness by texture, and her ears learning to hear the difference between a slow boil and a rolling one. "You're changing this place," Ethan observed one evening, watching her move through the cabin with increasing confidence. "Is that all right?" Lily paused, a sudden worry crossing her face. "I don't mean to take over. This is your cabin." "It's our cabin," Ethan corrected. "And yes, it's more than all right. You're making it a home." The truth was, Lily was changing more than the cabin. She was changing him. The man who'd ridden away from his buried wife with nothing but grief and aimlessness was finding something to anchor to. Each morning, he had a reason to rise. Each evening, he had someone waiting. The constant low-level despair that had colored his world for months was gradually lifting, replaced by something that felt almost like purpose. But their fragile new stability faced its first real test on a Thursday afternoon in early October. Ethan was finishing his work at the livery when Hoskins called him to the office. "Cole, we need to talk." Ethan followed him into the small, cluttered space, his stomach tightening. Getting fired would be catastrophic. "You've been doing good work," Hoskins began, which only made Ethan more nervous. Good news didn't usually start with serious tones. "But there's been talk around town about you and that blind girl." "What kind of talk?" "The concerned kind." People wondering if it's proper, a single man raising a female child alone, wondering if she's being properly cared for, properly supervised. Hoskins held up a hand before Ethan could protest. I'm not saying I agree with it. I'm saying it's happening, and I thought you should know. Ethan felt cold fury rising in his chest. Lily's being cared for just fine. She's got food, shelter, work that gives her purpose. What more do people want? Propriety, Hoskins said bluntly. Appearances. The comfort of knowing things are being done the right way. He sighed. Look, Cole, I don't make the rules. But I've seen this kind of thing before. Small town, unconventional situation, people with nothing better to do than worry about other people's business. It can get ugly if you're not careful. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe you should think about making things more official. Maybe talk to the Reverend about guardianship papers. Maybe find a woman willing to help with the girl's care. Make things look more respectable. Hoskins shrugged. Or don't. But don't be surprised if the town council starts asking questions you don't want to answer. When Ethan met Lily at the boarding house that afternoon, she immediately sensed his mood. What's wrong? She asked as he lifted her onto Dancer. Nothing for you to worry about. But even as he said it, Ethan knew it was a lie. Everything that affected him affected her. They were bound together now, for better or worse. They rode in silence for a while before Lily spoke again. People are talking about us, aren't they? Ethan shouldn't have been surprised by her perception. How'd you know? I hear things, whispers that stop when I enter a room, questions about where I live and who takes care of me. She was quiet a moment. They think it's wrong, don't they? You and me living alone. Some do. Ethan chose his words carefully. People get uncomfortable with situations that don't fit their idea of proper. What are we going to do? It was the question Ethan had been wrestling with all afternoon. The truth was, he didn't know. He couldn't marry just to make things look respectable. That would be a mockery of what he'd had with Sarah. But he couldn't lose Lily either. In the few short weeks since he'd found her by that roadside, she'd become essential to his life in ways he was only beginning to understand. We're going to keep doing what we're doing, he said finally. Keep working, keep surviving, keep proving them wrong. And if that's not enough? Ethan didn't have an answer for that. So instead, he did what he'd been learning to do. He changed the subject and hoped tomorrow would bring clearer solutions. But that night, lying on his cot while Lily slept peacefully by the dying fire, Ethan stared at the cabin's dark ceiling and faced an uncomfortable truth. Their current arrangement was temporary at best, impossible at worst. A single man and a young girl living alone would always raise questions, always draw scrutiny. And in a place where conformity meant survival, being different was dangerous. He thought about guardianship papers, about making things legal and official. But that required money for lawyers and a permanent address that wasn't a borrowed line shack. He thought about finding a wife, but the idea felt like betrayal. To Sarah's memory, to his own grief, to the sanctity of what marriage should mean. And he thought about the one solution he refused to consider, finding someone else to take Lily. An orphanage back east, a family willing to adopt, some situation deemed more proper and respectable. The thought made him physically ill. Ethan? Lily's voice came soft through the darkness. Are you awake? Yeah. I heard what you were thinking, not the words, but the worry behind them. She shifted on her pallet. You're afraid they'll take me away. No one's taking you anywhere. But they could. They could say you're not fit to care for me. That I need a real family, a proper home. Her voice remained steady, but Ethan heard the fear beneath it. Just promise me something? What? If they do take me away, remember that I was happy here. That these weeks with you, working at the boarding house, having a place that felt like home, they were the best I've had since Mama and Papa died. Promise you'll remember that? Ethan sat up, his heart breaking at the resignation in her voice. Lily Harper, I'm not letting anyone take you. I don't care what the town thinks, or what's proper, or any of it. You're mine to care for, and that's the end of it. But how can you— I don't know yet, Ethan interrupted, but we'll figure it out. Together. That's what we do, remember? One day at a time, one foot in front of the other. Lily was quiet for a long moment, then so softly he almost missed it. Thank you for stopping that day. On the road. Thank you for not riding past. Thank you for giving me a reason not to, Ethan said, and meant it with everything he had. Outside, an owl called through the darkness, its voice both lonely and resolute. And inside the cabin, two people who'd found each other by accident and necessity held on to hope that accident and necessity might somehow be enough. The owl's call faded into silence, but sleep wouldn't come for Ethan. He lay listening to Lily's breathing, even out, wondering how long they had before someone with authority decided their arrangement was unacceptable. A week? A month? He'd heard stories of children removed from homes deemed unsuitable, sent to institutions back east where they disappeared into systems that cared more about paperwork than people. The first frost came 3 days later, coating the valley in silver that burned away with the sunrise. Lily felt it in the changed quality of the air, the different sound their footsteps made on hardened ground. "Winter's coming early," she said as they rode toward town. "Looks that way." Ethan pulled his coat tighter. "We'll need warmer clothes soon, and more firewood than I've laid by." "How much do we have saved?" Ethan did the math in his head. 6 weeks of combined wages minus expenses for food and supplies. "About $14. Lily was quiet, and Ethan knew she was calculating the same problem he wrestled with daily. $14 wouldn't see them through a Texas winter, not with 2 mouths to feed and a cabin that let in cold through every crack. At the boarding house, Ruth met them at the door with an expression that made Ethan's stomach drop. "Mr. Cole, might I have a word before Lily starts her work?" Lily's hand tightened on Ethan's arm. He gave it a reassuring squeeze before following Ruth to her small office off the kitchen. Through the doorway, he could hear Mary greeting Lily warmly, already putting her to work. Ruth closed the door and turned to face him, her expression grave. "I had visitors yesterday afternoon, Mrs. Pritchard and Mrs. Van Heflin from the Ladies' Aid Society. They had concerns." "About Lily?" "About the situation. A young girl living alone with an unmarried man, no female supervision, no proper schooling." Ruth held up a hand. "Before you get defensive, let me be clear. I don't share their concerns. That child has flourished in the past 6 weeks. She's gained weight, learned skills, and carries herself with a confidence I didn't see when you first brought her here." "But?" Ethan could hear it coming. "But the Ladies' Aid Society holds considerable influence in this town. If they decide to make an issue of your guardianship, they can petition the county to intervene, and county officials tend to side with respectable society ladies over broke cowboys, regardless of the facts." Ethan felt the walls closing in. "What are they proposing?" "They didn't propose anything directly to me, but I've seen this pattern before." Ruth sat behind her desk, gesturing for Ethan to take the chair opposite. "They'll start with friendly suggestions. Perhaps Lily should live with a proper family. Perhaps you should send her to the Sisters of Mercy School in San Antonio, where blind children can receive appropriate education. When suggestions don't work, they escalate to social pressure. And when that fails, they involve the law. She's happy where she is. She's working, contributing, learning. What more do they want?" "They want conventionality, Mr. Cole. They want situations that fit their understanding of proper family structure." Ruth leaned forward. "I'm not telling you this to frighten you. I'm telling you because I think you need to take action before they force your hand." "What kind of action?" "Make your guardianship legal. File papers with the county clerk establishing yourself as Lily's official guardian. It won't stop the gossip, but it makes removing her much more complicated legally." Ruth paused. "And consider my earlier suggestion about finding help. A woman willing to provide female supervision, even part-time, would go a long way toward silencing critics." Ethan left the meeting feeling like he'd been kicked by a horse. Legal guardianship required proving he could provide for Lily long-term, which meant demonstrating stable income and permanent housing, neither of which he had. And finding a woman to help meant trusting someone else with Lily's care, opening their small world to scrutiny and potential interference. At the livery, Hoskins took one look at his face and handed him a pitchfork without comment. Sometimes physical labor was the only answer to problems that had no solutions. Ethan mucked stalls with fierce concentration, trying to work out his frustration on manure and hay. Around noon, a stranger rode into the livery on a fine bay gelding that spoke of money and breeding. The man himself matched the horse, well-dressed in a tailored suit, his boots polished despite the dusty street, his bearing suggesting someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I need boarding for 3 days, the man said to Hoskins, "and I'm looking for someone. A cowboy traveling with a young blind girl. I was told they might be in Cedar Flats. Ethan's hands stilled on the pitchfork. Every instinct screamed danger. Hoskins glanced at Ethan, then back at the stranger. Might be lots of cowboys pass through here. What's your business with them? Family business, the man's tone allowed no argument. The girl's name is Lily Harper. Her mother was Catherine Harper, née Whitfield. I'm Eleanor Whitfield's attorney, and Mrs. Whitfield has been searching for her great niece since learning of Catherine's death. The world tilted sideways. Family. Lily had family, wealthy family by the sound of it, and they'd come looking for her. Ethan stepped forward before he could think better of it. I know Lily Harper. The attorney turned, assessing him with the cold efficiency of someone who made judgments for a living. And you are? Ethan Cole. I've been caring for Lily since I found her abandoned on the trail 2 months back. Abandoned? The attorney's eyebrows rose. Mrs. Whitfield was told Catherine died of fever while traveling west. No mention was made of a child being left behind. The wagon train left her, said she was a burden they couldn't manage. Ethan's voice came out harder than he intended. I took her in. She's been with me since. I see. The attorney pulled a leather notebook from his coat. And where is Lily now? Every fiber of Ethan's being wanted to lie, to deny knowledge, to protect what he and Lily had built. But lawyers meant legal power, and legal power meant he'd already lost. She works at Patterson's boarding house, but you can't just... I assure you, Mr. Cole, I can do whatever is necessary to ensure Mrs. Whitfield's great niece is properly cared for. The attorney's tone softened slightly. Mrs. Whitfield is a widow of considerable means. She wants only to provide for her late niece's child, education, medical care, a secure future. Surely you can understand that's in Lily's best interest. Her best interest is being where she's happy and safe. And you believe that's a cabin in the wilderness with a man who works for 50 cents a day? The attorney didn't wait for an answer. I'd like to meet Lily this afternoon. I'll be staying at the boarding house, which seems convenient. Good day, Mr. Cole. He left, leading his expensive horse, and Ethan stood frozen in the livery's dim interior. This was it. The threat he'd feared manifesting in expensive clothes and legal authority. A wealthy great-aunt who could offer Lily everything Ethan couldn't. Security. Education. A future that didn't depend on 70 cents a day, and hope. He finished his work mechanically, his mind racing through impossible scenarios. Could he run? Take Lily and disappear into the territories where lawyers couldn't follow? But that meant a life of constantly looking over his shoulder, and more importantly, it meant denying Lily opportunities she deserved. Could he fight? Contest the great-aunt's claim? But with what resources? What judge would side with a penniless cowboy over a wealthy family? At 4 o'clock, Ethan arrived at the boarding house to find the attorney already installed in the front parlor, taking tea with Ruth Patterson. Lily stood in the kitchen doorway, her face pale, her hands gripping the frame. Ethan? Her voice shook. Mrs. Patterson says a man is here. About my family. He crossed to her quickly, taking her trembling hands in his. It's going to be all right. How can it be all right? I don't know these people. I don't want to go with strangers. Let's hear what he has to say first. Ethan kept his voice steady, though his own heart hammered against his ribs. The attorney introduced himself as Gerald Thorne, representing Eleanor Whitfield of Boston, Massachusetts. He spoke in measured tones about discovering Catherine Harper's death, about tracing the wagon train's route, about the shock of learning a child had been abandoned. Mrs. Whitfield is heartbroken, Thorne said. Catherine was her favorite niece. If she'd known there was a child, she would have come herself immediately. Lily stood very still beside Ethan's chair, her hand resting on his shoulder. I don't remember my mother talking about a great-aunt Eleanor. Your parents were estranged from the family, Thorne explained gently. Your father, forgive me, but these are facts. Your father came from common stock. The family didn't approve of the marriage. Catherine chose love over wealth, and the breach was never healed. He paused. But Mrs. Whitfield deeply regrets that estrangement now. She wants to make amends by providing for you. I'm provided for. Lily's voice gained strength. Ethan takes care of me. Thorne's expression was kind but implacable. Mr. Cole has done admirably under difficult circumstances. No one questions his good intentions, but Lily, your great-aunt, can offer you advantages he cannot. Schooling with teachers trained to educate blind children, medical care from specialists who understand your condition, music lessons if you have any aptitude, a secure home where you'll never worry about having enough to eat or stay warm. Each word landed like a blow. Everything Thorne said was true. Everything Ethan couldn't provide, this Eleanor Whitfield could offer in abundance. I don't want those things, Lily said, but her voice wavered. You're 8 years old, Thorne said gently. You don't yet know what you'll want at 12 or 16 or 20, Mrs. Whitfield simply wants to ensure you have choices. Ruth, who'd been silent throughout, finally spoke. Mr. Thorne, what exactly are you proposing? Mrs. Whitfield will arrive in Cedar Flats within the week. She'd like to meet Lily, spend time with her, and discuss arrangements for her future. Thorne looked at Ethan. Mr. Cole, no one is suggesting you've done anything wrong, but surely you can see that a child deserves the best possible opportunities. Ethan wanted to argue, to rage against the unfairness of a world where money mattered more than love. But looking at Lily, small and scared but trying so hard to be brave, he realized this wasn't about what he wanted or needed. It was about what Lily deserved. Can I think about it? Lily asked quietly. Before I have to decide anything? Of course. Thorne stood, gathering his papers. I'll be here all week. Take whatever time you need. He paused at the door. Lily, I know this is frightening. Change always is. But your great-aunt truly wants what's best for you. I hope you'll give her a chance to prove that. After he left, the parlor felt oppressively quiet. Ruth excused herself, leaving Ethan and Lily alone. They sat in silence for a long moment before Lily spoke. You think I should go with her, don't you? I think... Ethan's voice caught. He started again. I think you deserve a chance at a real future. Education, security, all the things I can't give you. But you give me a home and purpose, and someone who sees me as more than my blindness. Lily's unseeing eyes filled with tears. How can money replace that? It can't, Ethan admitted, but it can give you opportunities I never could. Lily, I'm a broke cowboy living in a borrowed cabin, working for wages that barely keep us fed. What happens when winter really sets in and we can't afford enough firewood? What happens if you get sick and I can't pay for a doctor? What happens when you're older and need things I don't even know to provide? What happens if I go live with strangers and I'm miserable? Lily countered. What happens if they treat me like I'm broken instead of just blind? What happens if I lose the only family I have left? The word family struck Ethan like a physical blow. When had that happened? When had this small girl he'd found by the roadside become family? I'm not leaving you, he said fiercely. No matter what gets decided, I'm not abandoning you. If you go to Boston, I'll find a way to check on you, to make sure you're being treated right, to be there if you need me. Promise? Lily's voice was very small. I promise. They rode home in heavy silence, the autumn sunset painting the sky in colors Lily couldn't see but could sense in the changing temperature of the air on her face. At the cabin, Ethan built up the fire while Lily sat at the table, her fingers tracing aimless patterns in the wood grain. Tell me about winter, she said suddenly. Real winter. The kind we'll have here. Ethan understood what she was asking, not about weather, but about survival. Gets cold. Real cold some nights, the kind that seeps through walls and makes your bones ache. We'd need to keep the fire going almost constantly, which means a lot of wood, and the trail to town can become impassable if we get heavy snow, which means we'd need supplies laid by to last weeks at a time. How much would that cost? More than we have. No point in lying. We'd manage somehow. We always do. By freezing? By going hungry? Lily's hands stilled. Ethan, I don't want to leave, but I also don't want to be the reason you suffer through a winter that could kill you. That's not... It is my choice, though, isn't it? She turned her face toward him. You said no matter what gets decided, but it's my decision to make. Mine and yours together. Ethan crossed to the table, sitting across from her. Then let's decide together. Let's meet this Eleanor Whitfield when she arrives. See what kind of person she is, what she's really offering, and then we'll decide what's best. What if we disagree? What if you think I should go and I want to stay? Then we'll figure that out when we come to it. Ethan reached across the table, taking her hands. One day at a time, remember? Lily managed a shaky smile. One day at a time. But that night, neither of them slept well. Ethan lay on his cot, staring at darkness and wondering how he'd found the strength to suggest Lily consider leaving. The honest answer was terrifying, because he loved her. Somewhere between the roadside and now, this child had become his. And loving someone meant wanting what was best for them, even when it broke your heart. The week that followed was the longest of Ethan's life. He and Lily maintained their routine, work, meals, quiet evenings by the fire, but everything felt fragile, temporary. They were both waiting for Eleanor Whitfield to arrive and change everything. She came on a Tuesday afternoon, stepping down from a private carriage that must have cost more than Ethan had earned in his entire life. Eleanor Whitfield was perhaps 55, dressed in elegant black mourning clothes, her silver hair styled in a fashion that spoke of big city sophistication. But her face, when she looked toward the boarding house where Thorne had told her to meet them, held an expression of such desperate hope that Ethan's resentment faltered. Ruth had offered her parlor for the meeting. Ethan and Lily arrived to find Eleanor already seated, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the door. When Lily entered, guided by Ethan's hand, Eleanor stood abruptly. A small sound escaped her, half gasp, half sob. "You look so much like Catherine," she whispered. "The same face, the same bearing. Oh, child." Lily stood very still in the doorway, her face pale. "Hello, ma'am. May I—" Eleanor took a step forward, then stopped, seeming to realize she might be overwhelming. "May I look at you properly? I've traveled so far hoping to find you." Lily nodded, and Eleanor approached slowly, her eyes drinking in every detail. When she reached out tentatively to touch Lily's hair, Lily flinched slightly but didn't pull away. "I'm sorry," Eleanor said, withdrawing her hand. "I don't mean to frighten you. It's just, you're so real. For weeks I've imagined finding you, and now you're here." They sat, an awkward gathering of four people bound by circumstance rather than choice. Eleanor explained about Catherine, about the rift in the family, about her profound regret at not mending that breach before it was too late. "Your mother was brilliant," Eleanor said to Lily. "Talented, headstrong, passionate about everything she did. I loved her dearly, but I handled the situation with your father poorly. I thought I was protecting her. Instead, I drove her away." "Mama never talked about you," Lily said quietly. "I don't imagine she did. The hurt was deep on both sides." Eleanor's voice cracked. "But Lily, I want to make amends. Not to Catherine, it's too late for that, but to you. Let me give you the life your mother deserved, the opportunities she sacrificed." "What kind of opportunities?" Lily asked. What followed was a description of a world Ethan could barely imagine. A home in Boston's Back Bay, staffed with servants. Tutors trained in this Perkins method of educating blind children, the same institution that had taught Laura Bridgman and would later teach Helen Keller. Music teachers who could nurture any aptitude Lily showed. Medical specialists who could examine her condition and determine if anything could be done to improve her sight. A life of security, education, and possibilities. "And Mr. Cole?" Lily asked. "What happens to Ethan?" Eleanor glanced at Ethan, and in her eyes he saw both sympathy and steel. "Mr. Cole has done a remarkable service in caring for you. I'm deeply grateful to him. But Lily, you must understand, your future lies in Boston, with your family and the opportunities that await you there." "Ethan is my family. He's a kind man who helped you when you needed it most." Eleanor's voice was gentle but firm. "But he's not your blood, Lily, and he cannot provide for you the way I can. Surely you can see that." Lily's hands were trembling where they rested in her lap. Ethan wanted to reach for them, to offer comfort, but felt paralyzed by the weight of the moment. "Can I think about it?" Lily asked. "I need time." "Of course." Eleanor stood, preparing to leave. "I'll be in town for another week. Come see me whenever you're ready to talk. And Lily, I know I'm a stranger to you now, but I hope, given time, we can become family in truth, not just in name." After she left, Lily sat motionless in the parlor chair. Ruth brought tea that no one drank. Finally, Ethan spoke. "She seems kind." "Kind people can still take everything from you," Lily said quietly, "even when they mean well." That night, Lily couldn't eat. She sat by the fire, her fingers tracing letters obsessively, her mother's name, her father's name, over and over as if repetition could bring them back. Ethan didn't know how to comfort her, so he simply sat nearby, present if not helpful. "Ethan?" Lily's voice came small through the firelight. If I go to Boston, will you forget about me? Never. The word came fierce and immediate. Lily Harper, I could no more forget you than forget my own name. But you'll move on, find another job, another place. Eventually I'll just be that blind girl you helped once. Ethan crossed to where she sat, kneeling before her. You listen to me. You're not that blind girl. You're Lily Harper, who survived losing everything and came out stronger. You're the person who taught me that life continues even after you think it's over. His voice broke. You're the reason I stopped on that road, and I'll never regret it, no matter what happens next. Lily's tears fell freely now, and she reached for him with the desperate grip of someone drowning. Ethan held her while she cried, feeling his own tears slip down his cheeks, knowing that love sometimes meant letting go, even when every instinct screamed to hold tighter. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, coating the valley in white silence. And inside the cabin, a cowboy and a little girl held on to each other, trying to find courage for the impossible choice that loomed ahead. The snow fell through the night, silent and relentless. By morning, the valley wore a blanket of white that transformed the familiar landscape into something strange and beautiful. Lily woke to the changed sound of the world, the muffled quality of snow-covered ground, the different way sound carried through cold air. It snowed, she said, not a question but a statement of fact. First real snow of the season. Ethan was already up, stoking the fire that had burned low during the night. About 3 inches, trail to town will be passable, but not for long if this keeps up. They prepared for the day in heavy silence, both avoiding the conversation that needed to happen. At the boarding house, Eleanor Whitfield was waiting in the parlor, her face lighting with cautious hope when Lily entered. I thought perhaps we could spend the day together, Eleanor said. If you're willing, I'd like to know you, Lily, not as my great-niece or Catherine's daughter, but as yourself. Lily hesitated, her hand tightening on Ethan's arm. He gave her a gentle squeeze. I'll be at the livery if you need me. Ethan, Lily's voice held panic. It's all right, he said quietly. Give her a chance. That's all she's asking. He left before he could change his mind, before he could pull Lily close and refuse to let anyone take her. At the livery, Hoskins took one look at his face and assigned him the dirtiest, most physically demanding work available. Sometimes that was the only kindness that mattered. At the boarding house, Eleanor guided Lily to the parlor where Ruth had set out tea and small cakes. They sat in awkward silence for a moment before Eleanor spoke. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. I've thought of little else for weeks. What I'd say to you, how I'd explain everything. But now that you're here, all my prepared speeches feel inadequate. Why did you come looking for me? Lily asked. If Mama left the family behind, why does it matter now? Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of old regrets. Because I loved your mother, and I failed her. Because I let pride and propriety cost me years I can never reclaim. Because I'm an old woman who has money and position but no family, and I suddenly realized how hollow that is. She paused. And because when I learned you existed and had been abandoned, I couldn't bear the thought of you suffering for my mistakes. I wasn't suffering, Lily said. Ethan found me. He took care of me. I know. And I'm grateful to him beyond words. Eleanor reached out tentatively, then withdrew her hand. But Lily, what happens next winter? The winter after that? What happens when you're older and need things he can't provide? Mr. Cole is a good man, but he's not equipped to give you the life you deserve. How do you know what I deserve? Lily's voice held an edge. You don't know me. You don't know what makes me happy or what I need. You're right, Eleanor said simply. I don't. That's why I'm here. To learn. Will you teach me? The question caught Lily off guard. She'd expected arguments, pressure, the kind of adult insistence that brooked no disagreement. But Eleanor's humility, her willingness to acknowledge ignorance, created an opening where none had existed before. What do you want to know? Lily asked cautiously. Everything. What do you do at the boarding house? What's a day in your life like? What do you think about when you're alone? What frightens you? What gives you joy? Eleanor's voice grew earnest. I've spent weeks imagining you, but imagination isn't the same as knowing. So Lily talked. Hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence. She described learning to fold linens by texture, the satisfaction of creating order from chaos through touch alone. She talked about the cabin's geography, how she'd memorized every step and surface until she could navigate it with confidence. She explained her finger writing, the way she practiced letters in flour and dust to keep her mother's lessons alive. Eleanor listened with an intensity that made Lily feel truly heard, asking questions that showed genuine interest rather than polite obligation. And slowly, against her will, Lily began to understand why her mother might have loved this woman. Beneath the wealth and propriety lay someone who cared deeply, if imperfectly. "Your mother used to do something similar," Eleanor said when Lily mentioned the finger writing. "She'd trace poetry in the air when she was thinking, said it helped her remember the rhythm and flow of language." She smiled sadly. "I'd forgotten that until just now. Thank you for reminding me." At noon, they took lunch in the boarding house dining room. Mary brought soup and bread, her eyes darting between Lily and Eleanor with obvious curiosity. Lily ate carefully, aware of being watched, determined not to spill or fumble despite her nervousness. "You've learned to manage well," Eleanor observed. "Someone taught you carefully." "Mama did, before she got sick. And Ethan helps when I need it, but he also lets me struggle sometimes. Says I need to learn to do things myself." "He's right." Eleanor set down her spoon. "Lily, I want to be honest with you about something. If you come to Boston, there will be people who underestimate you because you can't see, who treat you as fragile or helpless. I can't prevent that entirely, but I can promise to fight it. You've proven you're capable of far more than most people would assume. I want to give you opportunities to prove that to the world." "What kind of opportunities?" Eleanor's eyes lit with enthusiasm. "The Perkins School has teachers trained specifically for blind students. They've developed methods, raised letters, tactile learning, ways to read and write without sight. You could have a real education, Lily. Literature, mathematics, history, music, everything your mother wanted for herself but never got to pursue fully. Ethan teaches me," Lily said, defensive. "He reads to me in the evenings, tells me about the world." "I'm sure he does. But Lily, there's a difference between a kind man reading aloud and trained educators who understand how to teach someone who learns differently." Eleanor leaned forward. "I'm not trying to diminish what Mr. Cole has done. I'm trying to show you what else is possible." They talked through the afternoon, the conversation shifting from tense negotiation to something almost like connection. Eleanor shared stories about Catherine as a girl, her stubbornness, her brilliant laugh, her absolute refusal to accept limitations. Lily listened hungrily, gathering pieces of her mother she'd never known. "She sounds wonderful," Lily said quietly. "I wish I'd known her longer." "She was," Eleanor said, her voice thick. "And she'd be so proud of you, Lily. Of your strength, your determination, the way you've survived circumstances that would break most adults." She paused. "I can't bring her back, but I can give you the life she dreamed of, one where you're valued for your mind and spirit, not limited by your circumstances." When Ethan came to collect Lily at 4 o'clock, he found them in the parlor, talking with an ease that made his chest tighten. This was what Lily needed, connection to her mother's memory, someone who could tell her stories he never could. How could he compete with that? Eleanor stood as he entered. "Mr. Cole, thank you for allowing me this time with Lily." "It was her choice," Ethan said. "Even so." Eleanor's expression was difficult to read. "I wonder if we might speak privately." "Just for a moment." Ethan glanced at Lily, who nodded permission. They stepped into Ruth's small office, closing the door behind them. "I want to make you an offer," Eleanor said without preamble. "I know this is difficult for you. I know Lily means a great deal to you, and you to her. I'm not blind to that attachment, despite my desire to bring her to Boston." "What kind of offer?" Ethan's voice was wary. "Come with us. To Boston." Eleanor raised a hand before he could protest. "Not permanently, necessarily, but come for the first few months. Help Lily adjust, be there as she learns to navigate a new city and new circumstances. I have a large house. You could stay as my guest. Give yourself time to find your footing in a place with more opportunities than Cedar Flats can offer." Ethan stared at her, trying to process the suggestion. "You want me to move to Boston?" "I want Lily to have the best possible chance of thriving in her new life, and I think that means not severing her connection to you immediately and completely." Eleanor's voice softened. "Mr. Cole, I don't know what your dreams are or what you want from life. But surely working in a livery stable for 50 cents a day isn't the sum of your ambitions? It wasn't, but Ethan hadn't allowed himself to think about ambitions in months. Dreams were luxuries for people with futures, and his future had died with Sarah. I appreciate the offer, he said carefully, but I don't belong in Boston any more than you belong mucking stalls in Texas. Our worlds don't mix, Mrs. Whitfield. They do if we choose to mix them. Eleanor met his gaze steadily. I'm not trying to buy you off or patronize you. I'm trying to find a solution that serves everyone, especially Lily. Think about it, please. That night, riding home through snow that had started falling again, Lily was uncharacteristically quiet. The cabin felt smaller somehow when they returned, the walls closer, the future more uncertain. She's nice, Lily said finally, sitting by the fire. Eleanor, she's not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone cold, I think. Someone who'd look down on people like us. Lily's fingers traced patterns on her knees. But she's not like that. She's sad and lonely and trying to do right by Mama's memory. Ethan added wood to the fire, buying time before responding. She made me an offer, wants us both to come to Boston, for a while at least. Lily's head snapped up. Both of us? She thinks you'd adjust better if I was there, says I could stay at her house, help you settle in. Ethan sat across from her. I told her I'd think about it. What do you want to do? It was the question he'd been wrestling with all afternoon. What did he want? To keep Lily with him in the cabin, struggling through winters and uncertainty? To send her to Boston alone, trusting strangers with the most precious thing in his life? To follow her into a world where he'd never belong, sacrificing his pride for her comfort? I want what's best for you, he said finally, even if I don't know what that is yet. They sat in silence, the fire crackling, the snow falling outside. Finally, Lily spoke, her voice small and scared. I'm afraid, Ethan. Afraid of leaving. Afraid of staying. Afraid of making the wrong choice and regretting it forever. That's the burden of choosing, Ethan said quietly. Every path carries regret for the paths not taken. How did you choose? When you stopped on the road that day? How did you know it was right? Ethan thought back to that moment. The dusty trail, the crying child, the decision that had changed everything. I didn't know. I just knew I couldn't ride past. Sometimes that's all we can do. Make the choice we can live with and hope it's enough. The next morning brought a crisis that made their philosophical debates feel suddenly trivial. Lily woke coughing, a harsh, wet sound that made Ethan's blood run cold. By the time they should have left for town, she was feverish and struggling to breathe. I'm fine, she insisted, trying to stand. I can work. You're staying in bed. Ethan pressed her back down, feeling her forehead burn under his hand. This isn't just a cold, Lily. You need a doctor. We can't afford a doctor. We'll figure it out. But even as he said it, Ethan was calculating impossible mathematics. A doctor's visit would cost at least $2, maybe more if medicine was needed. That was almost 3 days' wages, money they didn't have to spare. He rode to town alone, leaving Lily with strict instructions to stay warm and rest. At the boarding house, he found Eleanor taking breakfast in the dining room. She took one look at his face and set down her fork. What's wrong? Lily's sick, fever, bad cough. She needs a doctor, but I don't have... His pride choked him, but necessity pushed through. I don't have money for it. Not enough, anyway. Eleanor stood immediately. Take me to her, now. Mrs. Whitfield, I can't ask you to... You're not asking. I'm insisting. Her tone allowed no argument. If Catherine's daughter is ill, nothing else matters. Let's go. They rode back to the cabin, Eleanor managing side saddle on Ruth's borrowed mare with surprising competence. Inside, they found Lily curled on her pallet, shivering despite the fire's heat. Lily, sweetheart. Eleanor knelt beside her, pressing a practiced hand to her forehead. I'm going to help you, all right? Eleanor? Lily's voice was weak, confused. Why are you here? Because you need me. And because I'm family, even if we're still learning what that means. Eleanor looked up at Ethan. Ride back to town. Bring Dr. Morrison. Tell him Eleanor Whitfield is requesting his services and money is no object. Ethan wanted to refuse, to assert that he could handle this himself. But looking at Lily's pale, feverish face, pride seemed like a luxury he couldn't afford. I'll be back as fast as I can. Dr. Morrison, a stern man in his 60s, arrived within the hour. He examined Lily with efficient thoroughness while Ethan and Eleanor waited outside in the cold. She's been working too hard, Eleanor said suddenly. A child her age, blind, working 7-hour days. Of course her body gave out. She wanted to work. She needed to feel useful. I'm not blaming you, Mr. Cole. Eleanor's voice was weary. I'm observing that this situation, however well-intentioned, isn't sustainable. Lily needs proper care, proper rest, proper medical oversight. She needs stability. She has stability. She has me. For how long? Eleanor turned to face him. What happens when you can't afford the next doctor's visit? When winter closes in and you can't keep her warm enough? When the town council decides your arrangement is improper and removes her by force? Her voice rose. I'm not trying to be cruel, Mr. Cole. I'm trying to be realistic. You love her. I can see that. But love alone doesn't keep children healthy and safe. The door opened before Ethan could respond. Dr. Morrison emerged, his medical bag in hand, his expression grave. She has pneumonia, early stages, but it could become serious quickly. He looked between them. She needs complete bed rest, warmth, and medication. I've left laudanum for the pain and fever, but she'll need careful monitoring for the next few days. Someone should be with her constantly. I will be, Ethan said immediately. What about your work? Eleanor asked. Ethan hadn't thought that far. Missing days at the livery meant no wages, which meant no food money, which meant the calculations spiraled into impossibility. I'll stay with her, Eleanor said firmly. Mr. Cole, you go to work. I'll remain here, tend to Lily, keep the fire going. When you return in the evenings, we'll manage in shifts. I can't ask you to... You're not asking. I'm offering. Eleanor's expression softened. Please, Mr. Cole, let me do this. For Catherine's daughter. For the child I should have been helping from the beginning. Over the next 3 days, an uneasy partnership formed. Ethan worked his shifts at the livery while Eleanor stayed with Lily, nursing her through fever dreams and coughing fits. In the evenings, Ethan took over, sitting by Lily's pallet through the long nights, listening to her labored breathing, praying to a deity he wasn't sure he believed in anymore. Eleanor proved surprisingly capable. She kept the fire going, managed medications with precision, even cooked simple meals from their sparse supplies. On the second evening, when Ethan arrived home exhausted, he found her sitting beside Lily, reading aloud from a book she'd brought from the boarding house. She's been asking for stories, Eleanor explained quietly. Said you usually read to her. Thank you. The words felt inadequate. For all of this. Eleanor looked down at Lily's sleeping face. She looks so much like Catherine, it breaks my heart. But she has strength Catherine never had. Strength born from hardship and survival. You gave her that, Mr. Cole. Don't think I don't recognize your contribution to who she's become. It was the closest Eleanor had come to acknowledging that Ethan had given Lily something money couldn't buy. The recognition eased something in his chest he hadn't realized was tight. On the fourth day, Lily's fever broke. She woke clear-eyed and weak, but breathing easier. Eleanor and Ethan sat on either side of her pallet, exhausted but relieved. You both stayed, Lily said wonderingly. You took care of me together. Of course we did, Eleanor said. You're precious to both of us. Lily was quiet for a moment, her fingers finding Ethan's hand on one side and Eleanor's on the other. When she spoke, her voice was small but certain. I think I need to go to Boston. Ethan's heart cracked, but he forced his voice steady. Are you sure? No, Lily admitted. But Eleanor's right. What happens next time I get sick? What happens when winter gets worse? I don't want to be the reason you starve or freeze, Ethan. I don't want to be a burden you can't afford. You're not. I am. But in Boston, I wouldn't be. I'd have education, opportunities, maybe even a future that's more than just surviving day to day. Lily's grip tightened on both their hands. But I have a condition. What's that? Eleanor asked. Ethan comes too, for a while at least, until I know I can manage without him. Lily turned her face toward Ethan. You said you'd always come back. Prove it. Come with me to Boston. Don't make me do this alone. Ethan looked at Eleanor over Lily's head. Eleanor nodded slowly, understanding passing between them. They were both being asked to sacrifice. Eleanor to share Lily with someone from her old life, Ethan to leave everything familiar and follow Lily into an unknown future. "All right," Ethan said, the words feeling torn from somewhere deep inside. "All right, Lily. If that's what you need, I'll come." Lily smiled, weak but genuine. "One day at a time?" "One day at a time," Ethan confirmed, and felt Eleanor's hand squeeze his across Lily's sleeping form, a gesture of solidarity between two people who'd become unlikely allies in caring for one remarkable child. Outside, the snow had stopped. The valley lay quiet under its white blanket, beautiful and harsh, like everything worthwhile in this world. And inside the cabin, three people who'd come together through loss and accident began planning a future none of them could have imagined just months before. The decision, once made, moved with the inexorable momentum of water finding its course. Within a week, Eleanor had arranged their passage east, train tickets purchased, accommodations secured, a future mapped out in practical details that left no room for second thoughts. Ethan spent his final days in Cedar Flats, settling accounts and saying goodbyes to people who'd become more than acquaintances in the brief time he'd been there. Hoskins paid him his final wages and shook his hand with rough kindness. "You did right by that girl," he said. "Not many would have." At the boarding house, Ruth pressed a package into Lily's hands. "Cookies for the train, and something else." She guided Lily's fingers to a small book, its cover embossed with raised letters. "It's a journal. Mary found it in San Antonio, designed for blind writers. The pages have raised lines to guide your hand. I thought you might like to practice those letters you're always tracing." Lily's fingers explored the gift with wonder. "I can write? Really write?" "You can do anything you set your mind to, child. Don't let anyone tell you different." Mary and Agnes had pooled their wages to buy Lily a warm coat for the Boston winter, dark blue wool with mother-of-pearl buttons. When Lily tried it on, Agnes, who'd been skeptical of her from the start, adjusted the collar with surprising gentleness. "You'll do well," she said gruffly. "You're stronger than you know." The hardest goodbye was the cabin. On their last morning, Lily walked through the small space one final time, her fingers trailing along familiar surfaces, memorizing distances she'd no longer need to know. She paused at the fireplace where she'd spent so many evenings, at the table where she'd practiced her letters in flour, at the pallet where she'd slept and dreamed and slowly learned to hope again. "I'll miss this place," she said quietly. "Is that strange? It's just a cabin." "It's not strange." Ethan's voice was rough. "It was home. That matters." They rode to Cedar Flats together one last time, dancers' hooves crunching through snow that had frozen overnight. Ethan had sold the horse to Hoskins, couldn't take her east, and she deserved an owner who could care for her properly. Saying goodbye to the patient mare who'd carried them through so much felt like severing the last thread connecting him to the life he'd known. The train station was small but efficient, the platform crowded with travelers heading in all directions. Eleanor waited with their tickets and luggage, including a trunk she'd purchased to hold their meager possessions, now supplemented with warm clothes and necessities she'd insisted on providing. "Ready?" she asked, her own expression suggesting she understood this moment's weight. Lily stood very still, her hand gripping Ethan's arm. "What if I don't like Boston? What if I can't manage?" "Then we'll figure something else out," Eleanor said firmly. "This isn't a prison sentence, Lily. It's an opportunity. But if it doesn't work, we'll find another way." The train arrived with a screech of brakes and a billow of steam that made Lily flinch. Ethan guided her aboard, describing each step as they climbed, the narrow corridor inside, the private compartment Eleanor had reserved. It was more space and comfort than Ethan had experienced in his entire life. Upholstered seats, polished wood panels, curtained windows that let in soft winter light. "This is what wealthy people ride in?" Lily asked, her fingers exploring the seat's fabric. "This is what you'll ride in from now on," Eleanor said. "Get used to it." The train lurched into motion, and Lily gasped, gripping the seat. Ethan sat beside her, describing what passed outside the windows as Cedar Flats disappeared behind them, the familiar buildings giving way to open plains, the snow-covered landscape stretching endlessly toward horizons she couldn't see. The journey east took 3 days, each one carrying them further from everything familiar. Ethan watched Texas give way to Louisiana, Louisiana to Mississippi, the landscape transforming from arid plains to humid delta to rolling hills. Lily absorbed it all through his descriptions, building her own maps from words and imagination. Eleanor proved to be a surprisingly easy travel companion. She'd brought books and read aloud in the evenings, her voice skilled at bringing characters to life. She answered Lily's endless questions about Boston with patience, painting pictures of a city built on water and commerce and old money, so different from the raw frontier they were leaving behind. "Will people stare at me?" Lily asked on the second day. "Because I'm blind?" "Some will," Eleanor said honestly. "People always stare at what they don't understand. But Lily, you'll also meet people who see past your blindness to who you really are. And eventually, you'll learn not to care what strangers think." "Do you care? What people think?" Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "I spent most of my life caring too much. It cost me my relationship with your mother, among other things. I'm trying to do better now." On the third afternoon, they crossed into Massachusetts. The landscape had changed completely. Dense forests instead of open plains, towns packed close together instead of scattered across vast distances, everything older and more established. Ethan felt increasingly out of place, a frontier cowboy heading into civilized society where his skills and experience meant nothing. That evening, as Lily slept in her berth and the train rattled through the darkness, Eleanor joined Ethan in the compartment's small sitting area. "You're having second thoughts," she observed. "About Lily?" "Never. About me belonging in Boston? Constantly." "Mr. Cole, may I call you Ethan?" "Suppose we're past formalities." "Ethan, then, I want to be clear about something. I'm not bringing you to Boston as a charity case or because Lily demanded it. I'm bringing you because I believe you have value beyond your current circumstances." Eleanor leaned forward. "I own property throughout the city, residential buildings, commercial spaces. I need people I can trust to manage them, people with integrity, work ethic, and the kind of practical wisdom that comes from surviving hard times." Ethan stared at her. "You're offering me work? I'm offering you a position, if you prove capable. Building management, tenant relations, overseeing repairs and renovations. It's honest work, it pays well, and it would give you independence while keeping you close enough to be part of Lily's life." She paused. "I'm not trying to buy your loyalty or assuage my guilt. I'm recognizing that you're a good man who deserves a chance at a future, same as Lily." "Why?" The question came out harsher than intended. "Why do all this for people who are nothing to you?" "Because you're not nothing to me. You're the man who saved my great niece when others abandoned her. You're the person who gave her dignity and purpose when the world said she was worthless. That matters, Ethan, more than you apparently realize." They arrived in Boston on a gray December afternoon, the city sprawling along the harbor in a maze of streets and buildings that overwhelmed the senses. Lily pressed close to Ethan as they disembarked. The platform chaos of shouting porters and jostling crowds, completely foreign to a child raised in frontier silence. "Stay with me," Ethan murmured, keeping his hand firm on her shoulder. "Eleanor's got someone meeting us." The someone proved to be a dignified butler named Harrison, who organized their luggage with military efficiency and ushered them into a carriage that made the one Eleanor had arrived in at Cedar Flats look modest by comparison. The ride to Eleanor's home took them through neighborhoods that grew progressively wealthier, culminating in a tree-lined street of massive brownstone houses that spoke of old money and older traditions. "We're here," Eleanor said as the carriage stopped before a 4-story building with iron railings and gas lamps flanking the entrance. Inside was a world Ethan had seen only in magazine illustrations. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, furniture that was probably worth more than he'd earned in his entire life. Lily clung to his hand, her face pale with overwhelm. "It's too much," she whispered. "Too big, too different. How will I ever learn to navigate this?" "The same way you learned the cabin," Eleanor said gently. "One room at a time, one day at a time. We're in no hurry." The staff, there was staff, multiple people whose job was simply maintaining Eleanor's household, greeted them with varying degrees of curiosity and welcome. The housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, took immediate charge of Lily, guiding her to a bedroom on the 3rd floor that was larger than the entire cabin had been. "Too much," Lily said again, but her fingers were already exploring the space. The 4-poster bed with its heavy curtains, the wardrobe filled with clothes Eleanor had commissioned, the desk by the window where she couldn't see the view, but could feel winter sunlight on her face. Ethan's room was down the hall, similarly appointed, but somehow feeling even less like home. He stood at the window looking out at streets lit by gas lamps, listening to the constant noise of a city that never fully slept, and wondered what he'd agreed to. That first night, Lily couldn't sleep. Ethan found her sitting on the stairs between floors, her face turned toward sounds she was trying to categorize and understand. "It's too quiet," she said when he sat beside her. "That doesn't make sense, does it? The city is so loud, but the house is too quiet. I can't hear you in the next room, can't hear the fire crackling or the wind outside. I don't know where I am." "You're in Boston, in Eleanor's house, safe and warm and cared for." "I know that up here," Lily tapped her head, "but I don't feel it yet. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense." Ethan put his arm around her shoulders. "It'll take time. Everything worth having does." The next weeks were an exercise in adaptation. Eleanor hired tutors who began working with Lily on the Perkins method of reading raised letters, opening worlds that had been closed to her. She learned to read with her fingertips, forming words from bumps on a page, her face alight with wonder at each new achievement. "Listen to this," she'd say, finding Ethan in whatever corner of the house he'd retreated to. "I can read, Ethan. Actually read. By myself, without someone speaking the words." She took music lessons from a patient instructor who recognized her natural ear and nurtured it carefully. Within a month, Lily could pick out simple melodies on the piano that dominated the parlor, her face showing a joy Ethan had rarely seen. But there were hard days, too. Days when the city overwhelmed her, when she missed the cabin's simplicity, when she felt like a frontier girl playing dress-up in someone else's life. On those days, Ethan would take her to the Common, Boston's Central Park, where at least the open space felt familiar. They'd walk the paths together, Lily's hand on his arm, and talk about nothing important until the world felt manageable again. Ethan's own adjustment proved rockier. Eleanor was true to her word about employment, starting him with small tasks, inspecting properties, coordinating repairs, learning the business of urban real estate management. He had an aptitude for it, she insisted, though Ethan suspected she was being generous. "You understand people," she told him after he'd successfully negotiated a dispute between a landlord and tenant. "You see past surfaces to what actually matters. That's a rare skill, especially in this city where everyone's so concerned with appearances." By spring, they'd settled into a rhythm that almost felt natural. Lily thrived at her studies, her confidence growing with each achievement. She made friends at the special school Eleanor enrolled her in, other blind children who understood her experiences in ways sighted people never could. She performed in a small recital, playing piano for an audience that included Ethan and Eleanor, and received applause that made her glow with pride. Ethan found his footing in property management, discovering he was good at problem-solving and working with his hands in this new context. Eleanor gradually gave him more responsibility, trusting him with larger properties and more complex situations. The work paid well enough that he began saving money, building something that resembled a future. But underneath the adaptation, a question lingered unspoken. How long would this arrangement last? Ethan was still living in Eleanor's house, still dependent on her generosity, still fundamentally unmoored from any life he could truly call his own. The answer came one evening in late May, when Eleanor called him to her study. Lily was at a friend's house for dinner, the first time she'd been confident enough to navigate a social engagement without Ethan present. "She's doing remarkably well," Eleanor said, pouring tea with the precision she brought to everything. "Better than I dared hope when we first arrived. She's a remarkable girl. Woman, almost. She'll be 9 soon." Eleanor handed him a cup. "Which brings me to something we need to discuss. Your position here." Ethan's stomach tightened. This was it. The moment Eleanor thanked him for his service and suggested he find his own way now that Lily was settled. "I've been thinking about your future," Eleanor continued. "You've proven yourself more than capable in property management. Several of my business associates have commented on your work. But Ethan, you can't live in my house indefinitely. It's not fair to you or to Lily. She needs to see you as an independent person with your own life, not as someone perpetually dependent on my charity." "I understand." The words came out flat. "I can look for lodgings." "I'm not asking you to leave Boston," Eleanor interrupted. "I'm offering you a partnership. There's a building in the South End, 6 units, currently in poor condition but good bones. I'll provide the capital for renovation. You provide the labor and management. When it's finished, we split the rental income. After 2 years, if you choose, you can buy me out and own the property outright. Ethan stared at her, trying to process what she was proposing. You want to make me a property owner? I want to give you the same thing I'm giving Lily, opportunity and independence. The chance to build something that's yours. Eleanor's expression was earnest. You saved my great niece, Ethan. You gave her dignity when the world said she was worthless. I can never repay that, but I can at least ensure you have a future that isn't dependent on my continued generosity. Why? The question had haunted him for months. Why do all this? You got what you wanted. Lily's here, safe and thriving. You don't owe me anything. Well, Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, gazing at the tea in her cup. When Catherine died, I thought I'd lost my last chance at family, at mattering to someone beyond my bank balance. Then you appeared with Lily, this man who'd thrown away his own comfort to care for a child who wasn't his, expecting nothing in return. You reminded me that family isn't always blood, that worth isn't measured in dollars, that sometimes the most valuable thing we can do is simply show up for someone who needs us. She looked up, meeting his eyes. You showed up for Lily. Let me show up for you. Not out of obligation, but because I've come to care about what happens to both of you, please. Ethan felt something shift in his chest, the last wall of pride crumbling, the final resistance to accepting help dissolving. All right, he said quietly. All right. Thank you. The building Eleanor proposed was indeed in rough condition, peeling paint, damaged plaster, plumbing that needed complete replacement. But Ethan could see its potential, the solid structure beneath years of neglect. He threw himself into the work with an intensity that surprised him, channeling months of displacement into something productive and real. Lily visited the site regularly, her fingers tracing new walls as they went up, her ears tracking the rhythm of hammers and saws. You're building something, she said with wonder, something that'll last. We're building something, Ethan corrected. You and me and Eleanor, all of us together. By Lily's 9th birthday, the building was habitable. Ethan moved into one of the units, the first place that was truly his in longer than he cared to remember. It was modest compared to Eleanor's mansion, but felt more like home than anywhere he'd been since leaving Texas. That fall, something shifted in Lily. She'd grown taller, more assured in her movements, her features beginning to show hints of the woman she'd become. One evening, walking her home from music lessons, she spoke with unusual seriousness. Ethan, I've been thinking about something. What's that? When you found me on that road, you didn't have to stop. You could have ridden past like everyone else did, but you didn't. You chose me. She was quiet for a moment. I want you to know I chose you too. Back in the cabin, when Eleanor came and offered everything. I could have gone without you, but I didn't. I chose you too. Ethan felt his throat tighten. I know you did. No, I don't think you do. I think you still believe you're just the cowboy who happened to be there. That Eleanor's the real family and you're something temporary. Lily stopped walking, turning to face him with that uncanny ability to find his location precisely. You're not temporary, Ethan. You're not just the person who helped me once. You're my family, the person I choose every day to be in my life. Do you understand? Yeah, Ethan managed. Yeah, I understand. Good. Lily smiled, taking his arm again. Because I'm planning to need you for a very long time. I hope that's all right. That's more than all right, Ethan said, and meant it with everything he had. The years that followed proved both easier and harder than those first difficult months. Lily continued to flourish, her talents developing in directions none of them had anticipated. By 12, she was composing her own music, simple pieces at first but growing increasingly complex. By 14, she'd published her first composition, a piano sonata that caught the attention of Boston's musical community. Ethan's property renovation business grew as well. He took on additional buildings, hired workers, built a reputation for quality and integrity. He never became wealthy by Boston standards, but he achieved something more valuable, self-sufficiency, and the respect of people who'd once seen him as just another frontier cowboy out of his depth. Eleanor remained a constant presence in both their lives. The matriarch who'd brought them together and continued to guide them with wisdom born from her own mistakes and redemptions. She attended every one of Lily's performances, every milestone in Ethan's business, the proud grandmother neither of them had expected but both desperately needed. And on quiet evenings, when the city settled into its version of rest and the world felt manageable again, Ethan would sometimes think back to that dusty Texas road where everything had changed. The girl crying by the roadside, the choice that had seemed impossibly difficult, the future that had unfolded in ways he never could have imagined. He'd ridden away from his old life expecting nothing but more emptiness. Instead, he'd found purpose, family, and a future worth building. Not because he'd planned it or earned it or done anything particularly heroic, but simply because he'd stopped when he could have ridden past. Sometimes he realized the bravest thing you can do isn't charging forward into battle or striking out for new territory. Sometimes it's just stopping, paying attention, showing up for someone who needs you, even when you think you have nothing to give. Lily had taught him that. This remarkable young woman who'd survived abandonment and loss, who'd learned to navigate a world that refused to accommodate her, who'd taken every opportunity offered and transformed it into something transcendent. On her 16th birthday, Lily performed a concert at Boston Symphony Hall, a full program of her own compositions that brought the audience to their feet. Ethan sat in the front row beside Eleanor, watching this confident young woman take her bows, and marveled at the journey that had brought them here. After the concert, as the crowd filed out and the hall grew quiet, Lily found them backstage. Her face was flushed with triumph, her eyes bright with happy tears. "Did you hear?" she asked, gripping Ethan's hands. "Did you hear what we created together?" "I heard," Ethan said, his voice rough with pride and love. "Everyone heard, Lily. You were magnificent." "We were magnificent," she corrected. "All of us. The family we chose." Eleanor joined them, pulling both into an embrace that would have scandalized her younger self, but felt perfectly natural now. "The family we chose," she agreed. Later, walking home through Boston streets that had become as familiar as those Texas plains once were, Ethan thought about the girl who'd been abandoned by a roadside and the cowboy who'd stopped to help her. About how their accidental meeting had transformed into something deliberate and lasting. About how family wasn't always about blood or obligation, but sometimes about the conscious decision to show up, day after day, for people who mattered. The blind girl who'd once traced letters in dust now wrote music that moved audiences to tears. The broken cowboy who'd thought his life was over had built something solid and good from nothing but determination and hope. And the wealthy widow who'd lost everything that mattered had found redemption in giving two lost souls the chance they needed. It wasn't the life any of them had planned. But as Ethan tucked Lily's concert program into his pocket, a tangible reminder of how far they'd all come, he realized it was better than anything he could have imagined. Because sometimes the greatest journeys don't take you to new places. Sometimes they take you home, even when home is something you have to build from scratch, with nothing but faith and the people who choose to stand beside you. And sometimes, the simple act of stopping on a dusty road changes everything. Not just for the child who needed saving, but for the man who needed something to save, and the woman who needed a family to complete her life. They'd all been lost once. They'd all been broken and abandoned in their own ways. But together, they'd built something that would last. Not a perfect family, but a real one, forged through choice and effort and love that transcended circumstance. That, Ethan thought, was worth every difficult mile of the journey. Worth every moment of doubt, every sacrifice, every leap of faith into an uncertain future. Because in the end, the measure of a life wasn't in what you accumulated or achieved. It was in who you showed up for when they needed you most. And in that measure, Ethan Cole had finally become the man he'd always hoped to be. The man who didn't ride past.